October 21st, 1600. Sekigahara Valley, central Japan. Tokugawa Ieyasu stands on a hillside, watching over 150,000 warriors, the largest army assembled in Japanese history, prepare for battle that will determine whether Japan remains fractured chaos or becomes a unified nation. Fog blankets the narrow valley as dawn breaks, obscuring the Western Army's positions across the field. Ieyasu is 58 years old, a survivor who's outlasted every rival through patience, cunning, and the willingness to wait decades for the perfect moment to strike. That moment is now. His Eastern Army, 75,000 strong, faces Ishida Mitsunari's Western coalition of 80,000 troop samurai who served under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the peasant who became Japan's ruler before dying 2 years ago. But Ieyasu has spent months negotiating secret deals with Western commanders, promises of land and power in exchange for betrayal at the crucial moment. Everything depends on timing. If his allies defect too early, the plan fails. Too late, thousands die needlessly. The fog begins lifting around 8 a.m., revealing massed ranks of armored cavalry, Ashigaru foot soldiers gripping spears, banners displaying clan crests snapping in autumn wind. War conches blast, drums thunder. The first arrows fly, black clouds arcing across morning sky. Within 6 hours, this single battle will end 400 years of warrior rule's evolution and begin 250 years of unprecedented peace under Tokugawa control. The blood spilled today will water the seeds of modern Japan. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, how a nation of rice farmers and courtly poets became a realm of armored horsemen, settling disputes with swords, we must travel back 800 years to when Japan's imperial court ruled. From magnificent Kyoto, blissfully unaware that their world was about to be shattered by men who valued sharp steel over elegant poetry. The year 794 marked Emperor Kamu's establishment of Heian-kyo, present-day Kyoto, as Japan's new capital. A relocation from Nara, representing more than geographical shift. It initiated an era witnessing gradual erosion of centralized imperial authority and emergence of warrior-dominated society, defining Japan for 7 centuries. The Heian period began with ambitious dreams of Chinese-style bureaucratic governance, yet concluded with thunderous clash of mounted warriors at Dan no Ura, where imperial court's political relevance drowned beneath waves alongside Taira clan ambitions. During early Heian period, imperial government maintained facade of Ritsuryo system, Chinese-inspired administrative framework, dividing the archipelago into provinces governed by appointed officials. However, vast distances separating capital from remote territories, combined with primitive communication networks, created administrative nightmares, proving increasingly difficult to manage. Provincial governors, kokushi, initially selected from court nobility, found themselves isolated from central oversight for months. These officials gradually discovered effective governance required military capabilities rather than poetic sensibilities or knowledge of Chinese classics. The transformation began subtly in countryside, where local strongmen emerged, filling power vacuums left by ineffective imperial administration. These early bushi, literally warrior gentlemen, were often descendants of imperial princes or court nobles, granted provincial positions, but choosing to remain in assigned territories rather than return to capital. Unlike court-bound relatives, spending days composing 31-syllable waka poems and debating aesthetic merits of seasonal color combinations, these provincial warriors developed practical skills in horseback riding, archery, and swordsmanship. The Fujiwara family's rise exemplified court nobility's increasing detachment from practical governance. Through strategic marriages to imperial daughters, the Fujiwara established regency system, placing them as permanent advisors to child emperors. Fujiwara no Michinaga, controlling imperial court from 995 to 1027, epitomized this system's excesses. His daughters married 4 different emperors, while his sons-in-law included 2 crown princes. Michinaga's court focused obsessively on aesthetic refinement, precise shades of silk appropriate for autumn ceremonies, correct number of layers in court ladies' kimono, subtle differences between incense blends. This cultural sophistication, immortalized in Murasaki Shikibu's tale of Genji, created insular world where courtiers competed in poetry competitions, while provincial warriors settled disputes with arrows and steel. The Fujiwara Regency's military incompetence became glaringly apparent during the early 9 Years' War and later 3 Years' War in northern Honshu. When the Abe and Kiyohara clans challenged imperial authority in remote Mutsu and Dewa provinces, the court proved incapable of mounting effective military responses. Instead, they relied entirely on the Minamoto clan, particularly Minamoto no Yoriyoshi and his son Yoshiie, to suppress rebellions. Yoshiie, known as Hachiman Taro after war god Hachiman, demonstrated emerging warrior ethos through tactical brilliance and personal courage. During siege of Kanazawa Stockade, Yoshi famously deduced enemy ambush by observing flight patterns of disturbed waterfowl, practical intelligence that court nobles absorbed in abstract philosophical discussions could never match. These northern campaigns established crucial precedents for warrior governance. Minamoto forces operated independently of court supervision, making tactical decisions based on immediate battlefield conditions rather than consulting distant bureaucrats who'd never seen combat. They recruited followers through personal loyalty rather than official appointment, creating military bonds transcending formal administrative hierarchy. Most significantly, they rewarded supporters with land grants taken from defeated enemies, establishing pattern of military conquest followed by territorial redistribution that would become feudalism's foundation. Simultaneously, the Shun system was fundamentally altering Japan's economic landscape. These private estates began as tax-exempt holdings granted to Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines, but rapidly expanded to include secular nobles and eventually warrior families. The process typically began when local landowners seeking to avoid crushing tax burdens imposed by provincial governors formally donated property to powerful court nobles or religious institutions while retaining actual control as estate managers. This legal fiction allowed original owners continuing farming their land while avoiding imperial taxation, since Shun enjoyed immunity from government interference. The Shun system's growth accelerated during 11th and 12th centuries as imperial government's fiscal crisis deepened. Court nobles desperate for income sources independent of government stipends actively encouraged Shun formation by offering protection to provincial landowners. Fujiwara no Michinaga personally controlled over 5,000 acres of rice-producing land through various Shun arrangements, estates operating as autonomous units with their own administrative systems, private armies, and judicial procedures. Estate managers, often local warriors serving as noble proprietors' representatives, exercised powers traditionally belonging to imperial governors, collecting taxes, settling disputes, maintaining order through force when necessary. The Shun system's military implications proved as significant as economic impact. Estate managers required armed retainers protecting valuable agricultural land from bandits, rival claimants, and occasionally imperial tax collectors attempting to assert government authority. These private armies, initially small bands of mounted archers, gradually evolved into sophisticated military organizations capable of challenging imperial forces. Warriors serving Shun developed intense personal loyalty to immediate commanders, rather than abstract devotion to distant emperors they'd never meet. They fought for tangible rewards, land grants, tax exemptions, elevated status within a state hierarchy rather than imperial ideals, meaning little in daily struggles for survival and prosperity. By mid-12th century, two warrior clans had emerged as Japan's most powerful military forces, the Taira and Minamoto. The Taira, descended from Emperor Kamu, established power base in Kanto region before expanding westward toward capital. Taira no Kiyomori, the clan's most successful leader, demonstrated remarkable political acumen, cultivating relationships with retired emperors and court nobles while maintaining family military strength. Unlike earlier warrior leaders remaining in distant provinces, Kiyomori moved to capital, seeking integration with existing political establishment, arranging marriages between daughters and imperial princes, accepting court ranks and titles, even adopting refined cultural practices characterizing Heian aristocratic life. The Minamoto clan, also claiming imperial descent through Emperor Seiwa, pursued different strategy. Based primarily in eastern provinces, they maintained closer connections to provincial warrior communities, forming backbone of their military strength. Minamoto leaders like Yoshie and later Yoritomo emphasized their role as protectors of warrior interests against court interference, rather than seeking accommodation with existing political order. They cultivated image of martial virtue and personal honor, appealing to provincial fighters, viewing court nobles as effeminate parasites living off warrior labor. The fundamental tension between these competing approaches, integration versus opposition, came to head during Shogun Rebellion of 1156. This conflict began as succession dispute between retired Emperor Sutoku and his brother, reigning Emperor Go-Shirakawa, but quickly evolved into proxy war between Taira and Minamoto clans. The rebellion's outcome demonstrated that military force had become ultimate arbiter of political disputes in Japan. Court nobles could no longer resolve conflicts through traditional means, poetic exchanges, bureaucratic maneuvering, appeals to Chinese precedent. When opponents possessed superior military capabilities, the Shogun Rebellion's aftermath saw Taira no Kiyomori emerge as dominant figure in imperial politics. He eliminated potential Minamoto rivals, most notably executing Minamoto no Tameyoshi, despite the man's advanced age and previous loyal court service. This decisive action reflected new political reality. Mercy was luxury successful warrior leaders couldn't afford when enemies might regroup and seek revenge. Kiyomori's subsequent rise to chancellor position in 1167 marked first time a warrior achieved highest court rank, symbolizing military class ascendancy over traditional court nobility. However, Kiyomori's success contained seeds of his family's eventual destruction. His efforts, integrating Taira clan into court society, alienated many provincial warriors, viewing such accommodation as betrayal of warrior values. When Kiyomori moved capital from Kyoto to Fukuhara in 1180, ostensibly to facilitate trade with Song China, he demonstrated same disregard for traditional precedent characterizing earlier imperial decisions. More critically, his increasingly autocratic behavior toward retired emperors and court nobles created resentment among potential allies who might have supported Taira rule under different circumstances. The spark igniting Genpei War came from Prince Mochihito, son of retired Emperor Go-Shirakawa, who issued call to arms against Taira in 1180. This proclamation, distributed secretly to warrior families throughout Japan, appealed directly to provincial fighters' sense of honor and resentment of Taira dominance. Minamoto no Yoritomo, who'd survived earlier purges by living in exile in Izu province, responded by raising his standard at Kamakura. His initial forces consisted of only few dozen mounted retainers, but his message resonated with warriors throughout eastern provinces grown tired of Taira arrogance and court interference in military affairs. The early Genpei War stages revealed fundamental differences between Taira and Minamoto military strategies. The Taira, based near capital, and accustomed to court politics, initially attempted suppressing rebellion through conventional means, dispatching imperial armies, led by appointed generals, possessing court rank but limited combat experience. Their forces relied heavily on conscripted peasant infantry, armed with spears and supervised by small numbers of mounted warriors. This approach had worked adequately against earlier provincial rebellions, but proved inadequate against determined opposition led by experienced military commanders. The Minamoto, by contrast, built strength through personal loyalty networks characterizing Eastern warrior society. Yoritomo didn't simply issue orders expecting automatic obedience. Instead, he carefully cultivated relationships with local strongmen by offering concrete benefits in exchange for military service, confirming existing landholdings, granting new territories captured from Taira supporters, and most importantly, promising loyal followers would receive permanent recognition of achievements rather than temporary rewards that might be revoked by future court decisions. This approach created military coalition based on mutual self-interest rather than abstract political principles. The war's turning point came with emergence of Minamoto no Yoshitsune, Yoritomo's younger half-brother. As military commander of exceptional ability, Yoshitsune possessed intuitive understanding of cavalry tactics, allowing him to exploit mobility advantages inherent in mounted archery. His victory at Battle of Ichinotani in 1184 demonstrated devastating effectiveness of coordinated cavalry charges against static defensive positions. Leading 70 mounted warriors down steep cliff face the Taira had considered impassable, Yoshitsune struck enemy camp at dawn when most defenders were still sleeping. The psychological impact of this surprise attack, combined with Minamoto forces' superior horsemanship, shattered Taira resistance and forced their retreat toward inland sea. Picture that moment. Yoshitsune on horseback at cliff's edge, looking down nearly vertical descent to Taira camp below. His men protest. Horses can't descend such terrain. The attempt is suicide. But Yoshitsune knows Taira confidence in this position's impregnability means minimal guards, maximum complacency. He spurs his horse forward. The animal slides, scrambles, somehow keeps footing on impossible slope. Behind him, 70 warriors follow their general into what should be death. They reach bottom miraculously intact. Charge, screaming into camp, where Taira warriors stumble from tents confused, half-armed, unprepared. Within minutes, elite Taira position becomes slaughterhouse. The victory's brilliance lies not in overwhelming force but in daring, exceeding enemies' imagination. This is the new warfare. Not courtly chess, but brutal innovation, personal courage, tactical genius that makes impossible possible. The Taira clan's final stand at Dan-no-ura in 1185 epitomized transformation that had occurred during Genpei War. This naval battle, fought in narrow straits between Honshu and Kyushu, pitted Taira fleet of approximately 500 vessels against roughly 840 Minamoto ships. The engagement began with traditional archery exchanges between warriors standing on ship decks, but quickly devolved into close-quarters combat as vessels rammed each other and boarding parties fought with swords and naginata. Imagine the chaos. Hundreds of ships crowding narrow straits, oars churning water into foam, warriors in full armor, balancing on rocking decks while drawing 7-foot bows and releasing arrows at enemies mere yards away. The twang of bowstrings, mixing with screams of wounded, splash of bodies hitting water, crunch of ships colliding. Samurai trained for horseback combat, now fighting on unstable platforms where one misstep means drowning in armor too heavy to swim in. The stench of blood and seawater, sweat and fear. Boarding parties leaping between vessels with swords drawn, fighting in confined spaces where longer weapons become liabilities and short-range brutality determines survival. The tide literally turned against Taira when local pilots, initially supporting them, switched sides mid-battle, and began providing navigation assistance to Minamoto forces. These pilots knew every current, every eddy, every treacherous rock in these waters. Their betrayal meant Taira ships suddenly found themselves driven toward shallows and reefs, while Minamoto vessels caught favorable currents. The death of Emperor Entoku, the 7-year-old child emperor who'd become symbol of Taira legitimacy, marked the end of Heian period's political order. His grandmother, Taira no Tokiko, reportedly told the boy they were going to visit underwater palace of Dragon King before jumping into sea while holding him. This act of ritual suicide reflected warrior code's emphasis on honor over survival, stark contrast to court nobility's traditional preference for exile or monastic retirement when facing political defeat. The child emperor, dressed in imperial regalia, disappeared beneath the waves. With him sank the sacred mirror, one of 3 imperial regalia, legitimizing imperial rule. Some say you can still hear the child's cries on stormy nights, when wind howls through Shimonoseki Strait. The mirror was never recovered, symbolic rupture with Japan's ancient political traditions. The Taira drowned by hundreds, their armor dragging them down, their proud clan banners sinking into darkness. Those who survived the battle faced execution or forced monasticism. Taira no Munamori, clan leader after Kiyomori's death, was captured and later executed. The once mighty Taira, who'd controlled imperial court and dominated western Japan, were annihilated. Later, locals would claim the crabs in these waters bore faces on their shells, souls of drowned Taira warriors eternally wandering the straits where their power died. Dan no Ura wasn't just military victory, it was statement. In this new Japan, swords spoke louder than poetry. Warriors commanded more respect than court rank, and battlefield prowess mattered more than imperial bloodlines. The age of elegant courtiers, debating the proper number of kimono layers, had drowned alongside the Taira. The age of warriors, rough, practical, brutal men who understood that power came from loyal followers, and sharp steel had begun. The waves at Dan no Ura had barely settled when Minamoto no Yoritomo faced monumental task of transforming military victory into lasting political control. Unlike previous warrior leaders seeking accommodation with existing imperial institutions, Yoritomo recognized effective governance required completely new administrative framework designed specifically for warrior rule. The court nobility's centuries-old bureaucratic machinery, with its emphasis on Chinese literary classics and ceremonial protocol, proved utterly inadequate for managing realm where armed horsemen settled disputes and land tenure depended on military service rather than imperial appointment. Yoritomo's decision, establishing headquarters in Kamakura, a fishing village nestled between forested hills and Sagami Bay, roughly 30 miles southwest of modern Tokyo, reflected his understanding of geography's role in political power. The location offered natural defensive advantages: steep hills, protected settlements, landward approaches, while Bay provided access to maritime routes connecting eastern provinces. More importantly, Kamakura's distance from imperial capital ensured warrior administrators could develop their own procedures without constant interference from court officials obsessed with precedent and protocol. The contrast between the two centers couldn't have been starker. While Kyoto's palaces showcased elaborate gardens designed for moon-viewing parties and incense competitions, Kamakura's buildings served practical military functions: training grounds for mounted archery, armories filled with weapons and armor, administrative offices where warriors settled land disputes with practical precedent rather than Chinese legal philosophy. The Bakufu tent government, referencing field headquarters used during military campaigns, represented revolutionary departure from previous Japanese governance models. Rather than attempting to reform existing Ritsuryo system, Yoritomo created parallel institutions operating independently of imperial bureaucracy. The Mandokoro served as Bakufu's central administrative office, handling correspondence with provincial warriors, and managing complex logistics of maintaining military forces across vast territories. The samurai dokoro functioned as military police force, responsible for maintaining order among warrior class and investigating crimes falling under bakufu jurisdiction. The monchujo acted as judicial body, resolving land disputes and other legal matters affecting warrior families, applying practical precedents rather than abstract legal principles derived from Chinese law codes. This institutional innovation created what historians term the dual polity system, two separate governments operating simultaneously within same territory. The imperial court retained nominal authority over civilian administration, religious affairs, and cultural matters, while bakufu controlled military forces, land distribution, and criminal justice. This arrangement allowed Yoritomo exercising real power without directly challenging imperial legitimacy, thereby avoiding political instability, plaguing earlier attempts at military rule. Court nobles continued receiving traditional stipends and participating in seasonal ceremonies, but their influence over practical governance evaporated as provincial warriors looked to Kamakura rather than Kyoto for leadership and legal resolution. The feudal hierarchy, emerging under Yoritomo's direction, reflected military realities determining Genpei War's outcome. At system's apex stood Shogun himself, bearing full title of Sei Taishogun, barbarian subduing great general. Ancient military rank Yoritomo requested from Emperor Go-Toba in 1192. This appointment provided legal justification for warrior rule while maintaining fiction of imperial supremacy, since Shogun technically served as emperor's military deputy rather than independent sovereign. Below Shogun, the Shugo system established military governors responsible for maintaining order within individual provinces. These officials, typically drawn from warrior families demonstrating loyalty during Genpei War, possessed authority to mobilize local military forces, pursue criminals across provincial boundaries, and guard imperial estates within their jurisdictions. The Shugo differed fundamentally from old Kokushi governors in their military background and direct accountability to bakufu rather than imperial bureaucracy. Where previous governors relied on written reports and administrative procedures, Shugo enforced authority through mounted retainers who could respond immediately to threats or disturbances. The Jito system addressed crucial question of local land management plaguing Shuan estates during late Heian period. These land stewards, appointed directly by bakufu, received authority to collect taxes, supervise agricultural production, and maintain order on specific estates or territorial units. Unlike previous system where estate managers served absentee court nobles rarely visiting their properties, Jito lived permanently on assigned lands and possessed intimate knowledge of local conditions, which fields produced highest rice yields, which peasant families could be relied upon for military service, which mountain passes required fortification against potential enemies. The relationship between Shugo and Jito created complex web of mutual obligations, forming feudalism's foundation. Jito owed military service to provincial Shugo when conflicts arose, providing mounted warriors equipped with horses, weapons, and several days' provisions. In return, Shugo protected Jito holdings from external threats and supported their authority against challenges from local rivals or discontented peasants. Both groups owed ultimate loyalty to Shogun, who could redistribute their holdings based on military performance and political reliability. This system's effectiveness faced its first major test when Kublai Khan's Mongol Empire turned attention toward Japan following conquest of Song China in 1279. The Yuan dynasty's naval expeditions represented unprecedented external threat requiring coordination between all levels of feudal hierarchy. Intelligence reports filtering through Korean and Chinese merchant networks described Mongol military capabilities in terrifying detail. Disciplined cavalry formations, traveling vast distances without rest, siege engines capable of reducing stone fortifications to rubble, composite bows with effective ranges exceeding anything Japanese archers had encountered. The first Mongol invasion fleet departed Korean ports in November 1274, carrying approximately 15,000 Mongol and Chinese troops, along with 8,000 Korean auxiliaries, aboard roughly 300 vessels. The armada's initial target was Tsushima Island, where local garrison under So Sukekuni faced impossible odds. Contemporary accounts describe defenders' desperate resistance against overwhelming numbers, with Japanese warriors employing traditional individual combat techniques against Mongol formations fighting as coordinated units. The invaders' use of explosive projectiles, ceramic bombs filled with gunpowder and metal fragments, created psychological terror among defenders accustomed to conventional archery duels. After 3 days of fierce fighting, Tsushima's garrison was annihilated, providing Mongols their first foothold in Japanese territory. The invasion force next struck Iki Island, where a pattern of heroic but futile resistance repeated itself. The island's military governor, Taira Kagetaka, led approximately 100 mounted warriors against thousands of Mongol troops in series of cavalry charges, demonstrating both courage and tactical limitations of traditional Japanese warfare. While individual Japanese warriors possessed superior swordsmanship and archery skills, their emphasis on single combat proved disastrous against enemies who coordinated movements and concentrated firepower against isolated targets. The main invasion force landed at Hakata Bay on Kyushu's northern coast, where they encountered first coordinated Japanese resistance. Kyushu Shugo had mobilized approximately 10,000 warriors from across the island, creating largest Japanese army assembled since Genpei War's conclusion. However, these forces lacked experience fighting as a unified army rather than individual war bands, and commanders struggled coordinating movements across extended beachhead. The initial engagements revealed fundamental differences between Japanese and Mongol military philosophy. Japanese warriors sought personal glory through individual acts of valor, riding forward to announce their names, lineages, and past accomplishments before engaging enemies in single combat. The Mongols had no patience for such theatrics. They fought as disciplined formations, focused on achieving tactical objectives regardless of individual recognition. When samurai rode forward expecting formal challenges, Mongol units surrounded them and shot them down with massed crossbow volleys. The psychological impact was devastating. These weren't honorable warriors, but efficient killers who treated combat as butchery rather than art. The Mongols established fortified beachhead and began advancing inland, employing siege tactics Japanese defenders had never encountered. Their use of catapults and early firearms created breaches in hastily constructed palisades, while coordinated infantry assaults prevented Japanese cavalry from exploiting mobility advantages. Contemporary chronicles described terrifying sound of Mongol war drums and gongs, coordinating troop movements, creating alien soundscape, adding to psychological pressure on Japanese defenders. The invaders' practice of taking no prisoners and showing no mercy to captured warriors violated Japanese expectations about honorable warfare, further demoralizing resistance efforts. However, the Mongol expedition faced logistical challenges, proving as dangerous as Japanese resistance. The invasion fleet's hasty departure from Korea had prevented adequate preparation for extended operations, leaving army dependent on supplies landed at Hakata Bay. Autumn storms in Korea Strait disrupted communication with Yuan bases, while Japanese naval forces, though inferior in numbers, managed harassing supply convoys using superior knowledge of local waters. On November 19, 1274, a massive typhoon struck the invasion fleet, while most vessels remained anchored in Hakata Bay. The storm's fury exceeded anything in recorded Japanese meteorological history. Winds estimated over 100 miles per hour, driving mountainous waves against crowded anchorage. Mongol ships, designed for river warfare and coastal operations rather than open ocean storms, proved catastrophically vulnerable to typhoons' assault. Contemporary accounts describe vessels being driven ashore like toys, wooden hulls splintering against rocks, while crews struggled helplessly against storm's overwhelming power. The few ships managing to escape bay faced equally dangerous conditions in open Korea Strait, where many foundered with all hands lost. The typhoon's aftermath revealed invasion's complete collapse. Thousands of Mongol corpses littered Kyushu's beaches, while survivors faced Japanese forces that had regrouped during storm. Without naval support or hope of reinforcement, remaining invaders surrendered or died fighting hopeless rearguard actions. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders was profound. Many interpreted typhoon as divine intervention by Shinto kami and Buddhist deities, protecting Japan from foreign contamination. This religious interpretation would later evolve into kamikaze concept, literally divine wind, becoming central to Japanese national mythology. The 1,274 invasion's failure provided valuable lessons Bakufu applied, preparing for anticipated second Mongol assault. Hojo Tokimune, who'd assumed Bakufu regent leadership following his father's death, ordered construction of extensive coastal fortifications along Kyushu's northern shores. These defenses included massive stone wall, extending over 10 miles along Hakata Bay's coastline, designed to prevent amphibious landings, while providing protected positions for archer formations. The wall's construction required mobilizing thousands of workers and vast quantities of stone, demonstrating Bakufu's ability coordinating large-scale engineering projects across multiple provinces. Simultaneously, Bakufu implemented military reforms addressing tactical deficiencies revealed during First Invasion. Warrior training emphasized coordinated group tactics rather than individual combat skills, while new weapons and armor were developed, countering Mongol advantages. Japanese armorers began producing lighter, more flexible armor suitable for extended combat rather than elaborate ceremonial suits, characterizing earlier periods. The Second Mongol invasion of 1281 represented far more serious threat than its predecessor. Kublai Khan had learned from First Expedition's failures, assembling two separate fleets converging on Kyushu from different directions. The Eastern Route Army, departing Korean ports, carried approximately 40,000 troops aboard 900 vessels, while Southern Route Army sailed from southern China with roughly 100,000 soldiers on over 3,500 ships. This massive armada represented one of the largest naval expeditions in medieval history, dwarfing even later Spanish Armada in troop numbers and logistical complexity. The invasion began May 1281, when Eastern Route Army landed on Tsushima and Iki Islands, quickly overwhelming reinforced garrisons established following First Invasion. However, Japanese defenders had learned from previous experience, avoiding pitched battles in favor of guerrilla tactics, exploiting knowledge of local terrain. Rather than meeting invaders in formal combat, Japanese forces conducted hit-and-run attacks against Mongol supply lines, while retreating to prepared positions in islands' mountainous interiors. When Eastern Route Army reached Kyushu in June 1281, they encountered formidable stone wall constructed along Hakata Bay. The fortification's effectiveness exceeded all expectations. Mongol landing craft found themselves trapped in killing zones where Japanese archers could concentrate fire while remaining protected from return volleys. The wall's strategic positioning forced invaders landing at predetermined points where Japanese forces had prepared elaborate defensive positions, complete with hidden archer nests and cavalry staging areas for counterattacks. The siege of coastal fortifications continued through summer months, as both armies awaited Southern Route Army's arrival from China. This delay proved costly for Mongols, finding themselves committed to maintaining large army in hostile territory without achieving decisive victory. Japanese forces employed innovative naval tactics, using small, maneuverable vessels, conducting night raids against Mongol fleet anchored in Hakata Bay. These attacks, though individually insignificant, gradually eroded Mongol morale while preventing establishment of secure supply lines. Southern route armies' delayed arrival in August 1281 initially appeared tipping balance decisively in Mongols' favor. Combined invasion force now numbered over 140,000 troops, larger than any army operating in Japan until 20th century. However, prolonged campaign had already strained expeditions' logistical capabilities, while Japanese defenders used intervening months, strengthening positions and coordinating resistance efforts. On August 15, 1281, another massive typhoon struck invasion fleet with even greater force than 1,274 storm. The second kamikaze proved far more devastating than predecessor, destroying estimated 80% of Mongol vessels and drowning approximately 100,000 troops. Contemporary Chinese sources described storm's unprecedented fury waves reportedly reaching heights of 30 feet, winds driving fully grown trees through air like spears. The invasion's failure had profound consequences for Japan's feudal development, extending far beyond immediate military victory. The massive mobilization required repelling Mongols demonstrated Bakufu's organizational capabilities, while creating unprecedented financial burdens, straining system for decades. Unlike traditional internal conflicts where victorious warriors could reward followers with lands confiscated from defeated enemies, Mongol wars produced no territorial gains compensating loyal service. This created crisis of expectations among warrior class, who'd provided military service based on anticipation of material rewards Bakufu couldn't deliver. The Hojo family's role during invasions significantly enhanced their political position within Bakufu structure. As hereditary regents who'd effectively controlled shogunal authority since early 13th century, the Hojo had managed war effort, while nominal shoguns remained ceremonial figureheads. Hojo Tokimune's leadership during both invasions established family reputation as protectors of Japanese independence, providing political legitimacy transcending origins as Minamoto vassals who'd usurped their master's authority through political manipulation. The regent system's evolution reflected broader changes within Japanese feudalism, begun even before Mongol threat materialized. Following Minamoto no Yoritomo's death in 1199, his sons Yoriya and Sanetomo proved incapable of maintaining effective control over warrior coalition their father assembled. The Minamoto bloodline's weakness created opportunities for ambitious subordinates, particularly Hojo Tokimasa, whose daughter Masako had married Yoritomo and produced next generation of Minamoto heirs. Through series of political assassinations and strategic alliances, Hojo gradually eliminated potential rivals, while maintaining fiction of Minamoto rule through puppet shoguns, possessing bloodline credentials necessary for political legitimacy. By time of Mongol invasions, Hojo Regency had become Bakufu's true governing authority, controlling policy decisions while allowing ceremonial shoguns performing ritual functions associated with their office. The post-invasion period witnessed gradual erosion of Hojo Regency's effectiveness as financial and political strains of maintaining feudal system without adequate rewards became increasingly apparent. Warriors who'd sacrificed personal resources fighting Mongols found themselves impoverished by experience, while Bakufu lacked sufficient lands or alternative compensation addressing their grievances. This economic crisis coincided with broader social changes challenging traditional feudal relationships, emergence of money, economies in urban areas, development of trade networks operating independently of warrior control. Religious institutions played increasingly important role, legitimizing warrior rule, while providing alternative sources of political authority, sometimes conflicting with Bakufu interests. Major Buddhist monasteries had supported war effort through prayers and financial contributions, but their growing wealth and political influence created potential challenges to secular authority. Zen Buddhism, newly imported from China, appealed particularly to warrior sensibilities, with emphasis on discipline, meditation, and direct spiritual experience, rather than elaborate ceremonial practices. The Hojo regents patronized Zen temples as means of cultivating cultural sophistication while maintaining control over religious institutions that might otherwise develop independent political agendas. The mounting pressures straining Hojo regency throughout early 14th century finally reached breaking point when Emperor Go-Daigo launched audacious attempt reclaiming direct imperial authority in 1333. Unlike previous imperial challenges to warrior rule typically emerging from court intrigue or succession disputes, Go-Daigo's rebellion represented comprehensive rejection of dual polity system governing Japan for nearly 150 years. The emperor's vision extended beyond mere restoration of imperial prerogatives. He sought eliminating Bakufu entirely and establishing Chinese-style autocratic monarchy, where emperor would exercise direct administrative control over all governance aspects, from military command to tax collection and judicial proceedings. Go-Daigo's political philosophy drew heavily from Chinese imperial models, particularly Tang and Song dynasties' centralized bureaucratic systems, originally inspiring Japan's Ritsuryo framework during Nara period. However, his understanding of these foreign precedents was filtered through centuries of Japanese adaptation and practical realities of warrior-dominated society, bearing little resemblance to ancient Chinese administrative structures. The emperor envisioned himself as philosopher king, personally overseeing governmental affairs, while surrounded by scholar officials selected for literary accomplishments and moral character rather than military prowess. Administrative experience. The rebellion's initial success stemmed largely from widespread dissatisfaction with Hojo rule among various Japanese society segments. Warriors throughout provinces had grown increasingly resentful of regents' inability, providing adequate rewards for military service, particularly following enormous sacrifices demanded during Mongol invasions. Many provincial families found themselves impoverished by costs of maintaining military readiness while receiving no compensation for loyalty. Simultaneously, court nobles marginalized by warrior rule saw Go-Daigo's movement as opportunity, reclaiming ancestral political influence and restoring cultural primacy of classical learning over military values. Go-Daigo's most significant early victory came through alliance with Ashikaga Takauji, prominent warrior whose family had served Hojo regency for generations while maintaining ambitions for independent power. Takauji commanded substantial military forces in Kanto region where his family's influence extended through complex networks of vassalage and land tenure, developed over decades of careful political cultivation. His decision abandoning Hojo cause reflected both personal opportunism and genuine recognition that regency's authority had become fatally compromised by inability addressing fundamental contradictions within feudal system. The Hojo regency's collapse occurred with stunning rapidity once key military supporters began defecting to imperial cause. Nitta Yoshisada, another powerful eastern warrior, led decisive assault on Kamakura in July 1333, commanding army, including many former Bakufu vassals, concluding their interests lay with emerging imperial restoration rather than discredited military government. The siege of Kamakura lasted only 3 weeks, but fighting proved exceptionally fierce as Hojo defenders made desperate stands in narrow valleys and fortified positions, protecting warrior capital for over a century. The final battle witnessed scenes of extraordinary carnage as Hojo loyalists chose death over surrender in accordance with warrior honor codes evolved during previous century. Hojo Takatoki, last regent, committed seppuku, along with over 800 retainers in mass suicide, demonstrating both depth of their loyalty and recognition that political order they'd served was irretrievably lost. The ritual nature of these deaths, conducted according to precise ceremonial protocols, contrasted sharply with chaotic urban warfare raging simultaneously throughout Kamakura's streets as Nitta's forces systematically eliminated remaining resistance. The destruction of Kamakura marked more than particular government's end. It represented complete elimination of institutional framework governing Japan since Minamoto no Yoritomo's Genpei War victory. Bakufu's administrative records were destroyed, financial reserves seized by victorious imperial forces, complex network of appointments and land grants sustaining warrior loyalty dissolved overnight. This institutional collapse created power vacuum, proving far more difficult to fill than Go-Daigo and supporters anticipated. The Kemu Restoration began in 1333, with ambitious plans implementing comprehensive governmental reforms, restoring imperial authority, while modernizing administrative procedures according to contemporary Chinese models. Go-Daigo established new bureaucratic offices, staffed primarily by court nobles and Buddhist monks, possessing classical education but lacking practical experience in military affairs or provincial administration. The emperor personally presided over judicial proceedings attempting to resolve land disputes and criminal cases through direct imperial intervention rather than delegating authority to specialized courts or regional officials. These administrative innovations quickly revealed fundamental misunderstandings about Japanese society's nature. After nearly 2 centuries of warrior rule, imperial government's attempts reasserting direct control over provincial affairs encountered immediate resistance from local strongmen, grown accustomed to managing territories without interference from distant bureaucrats. Warriors who'd supported restoration expected rewards with land grants and elevated status, but Go-Daigo's preference for court nobles and religious figures in key positions frustrated these expectations while creating new sources of political tension. The emperor's land redistribution policies proved particularly problematic, attempting to restore ancient patterns of imperial ownership superseded by generations of feudal development. Many estates Go-Daigo sought, reclaiming for imperial control, had been divided and subdivided through inheritance, military service grants, and commercial transactions, creating complex webs of overlapping claims and obligations. Imperial government's efforts, untangling these arrangements through administrative decree rather than negotiated settlement, generated widespread resentment among affected parties, while demonstrating restoration's limited understanding of contemporary economic realities. Military affairs presented even greater challenges. Go-Daigo attempted establishing new army based on imperial appointment rather than feudal loyalty, but this approach failed, accounting for personal relationships and material incentives motivating warrior service. Traditional court nobles possessed no military experience and proved incapable commanding troops in combat situations, while professional warriors remained suspicious of government seemingly favoring civilian administrators over military expertise. Ashikaga Takauji's growing disillusionment with Kemu restoration reflected broader warrior concerns about imperial policy direction. As one of restoration's key military supporters, Takauji expected receiving substantial rewards and political influence commensurate with contributions to Go-Daigo's victory. However, emperor's preference for court nobles and religious figures in important positions increasingly marginalized warrior interests, while suggesting restoration viewed military leaders as temporary allies rather than permanent governance. Partners. The breaking point came in 1335 when Hojo Tokiyuki, son of last regent, launched restoration attempt, briefly recapturing Kamakura before being defeated by Takauji's forces. Go-Daigo's subsequent refusal, granting Takauji permanent authority over Kanto region, despite crucial role suppressing Hojo revival, demonstrated emperor's fundamental misunderstanding of warrior expectations and political realities. Takauji had invested substantial personal resources defending imperial authority, and followers expected tangible rewards compensating loyalty and sacrifice. Emperor's decision maintaining direct imperial control over eastern provinces, rather than delegating authority to proven military commanders, revealed Restoration's inability, balancing idealistic principles with practical governance requirements. Takauji's rebellion against imperial authority in 1336 marked beginning of new phase in Japanese political development, establishing warrior rule on more permanent and sophisticated basis than previous bakufu achieved. Unlike earlier military challenges to imperial authority typically seeking accommodation within existing political frameworks, Takauji's movement represented comprehensive rejection of Kemu Restoration's civilian-dominated governance approach. The military campaigns following Takauji's break with Go-Daigo demonstrated superior organizational capabilities and tactical expertise professional warriors possessed compared to Restoration's improvised forces. Takauji's army employed sophisticated logistics systems developed during generations of feudal warfare, while commanders understood coordinating cavalry movements and archery formations, maximizing effectiveness against less experienced opponents. Imperial forces, despite numerical advantages and control over traditional legitimacy symbols, proved incapable matching military professionalism characterizing Takauji's coalition. The decisive Battle of Minatogawa in 1336 illustrated these tactical disparities with devastating clarity. Kusunoki Masashige, one of Go-Daigo's most capable military commanders, led approximately 700 mounted warriors in desperate attempt preventing Takauji's forces from advancing on capital. Despite personal courage and tactical skill, Kusunoki faced impossible odds against Takauji's army of over 10,000 experienced fighters reinforced by defectors from imperial cause. The battle's outcome was determined not by individual heroism, but by systematic military superiority reflecting decades of professional development within warrior class. Takauji's establishment of new bakufu in Kyoto represented fundamental departure from previous warrior government patterns. Rather than maintaining geographical separation between military and civilian authority characterizing Kamakura's system, Takauji positioned government directly within imperial capital, where it could exercise immediate control over court activities and ceremonial functions. This proximity allowed Ashikaga shogunate integrating military and civilian administrative functions, while maintaining closer supervision over potential opposition sources than had been possible when warrior headquarters remained in distant Kamakura. The legitimacy crisis emerging from Takauji's rebellion created unprecedented situation of two competing imperial courts claiming authority over same territory. Go-Daigo's flight to Yoshino in mountainous Nara region established Southern Court, which maintained possession of sacred imperial regalia and could therefore claim legitimacy based on traditional authority symbols. Meanwhile, Takauji installed Emperor Komyo in Kyoto as Northern Court sovereign, providing government with ceremonial validation necessary for effective rule, while controlling practical instruments of political power. The Nanbokucho period, beginning in 1336, represented more than simple succession dispute between rival claimants to imperial authority. The division reflected fundamental disagreements about legitimate government's nature in Japan and proper relationship between military power and imperial tradition. Southern Court embodied principle that imperial authority derived from divine mandate and sacred inheritance that couldn't be transferred through political negotiation or military conquest. Northern Court, by contrast, represented pragmatic recognition that effective governance required accommodation between imperial legitimacy and warrior capabilities, even if such arrangements compromised traditional imperial sovereignty concepts. This constitutional crisis created opportunities for provincial strongmen, enhancing independence by playing competing courts against each other while pursuing own territorial ambitions. Local warriors could support whichever court offered most favorable terms for particular circumstances, switching allegiances when political conditions changed or better opportunities emerged elsewhere. The result was a complex pattern of shifting loyalties, defying simple geographical or ideological categorization, as individual families made strategic calculations based on immediate self-interest rather than abstract political principles. The Nanbokucho conflict's resolution in 1392, through Emperor Gokomatsu's abdication and imperial line reunification under northern court auspices, marked beginning of extraordinary cultural renaissance, defining Japanese civilization for centuries. Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, third shogun who'd orchestrated this political reconciliation, possessed sophisticated understanding of how cultural patronage could legitimize warrior rule while creating lasting monuments to Ashikaga authority. Unlike predecessors focusing primarily on military consolidation and administrative efficiency, Yoshimitsu recognized true political stability required cultivating arts, philosophy, and international prestige, elevating shogun's status beyond mere military dominance. The establishment of Muromachi Bakufu in Kyoto's Muromachi district created unprecedented opportunities for cultural synthesis between warrior traditions and court refinement. Physical proximity between shogunal headquarters and imperial palaces facilitated daily interaction between military administrators and court nobles, fostering an environment where martial values could be tempered by aesthetic sophistication, while classical learning gained practical application through warrior patronage. This geographic integration contrasted sharply with Kamakura period's deliberate separation of military and civilian cultures, allowing cross-fertilization, producing distinctly Japanese innovations in architecture, literature, and religious practice. Zen Buddhism's rapid ascendancy during this period reflected both philosophical appeal to warrior sensibilities and practical utility as diplomatic tool for international relations. The Rinzai school, introduced from China during late Kamakura period, found particular favor among Ashikaga shoguns, who appreciated emphasis on direct spiritual experience, achieved through rigorous mental discipline rather than elaborate ceremonial observances. The religion's core principles, self-reliance, intuitive understanding, rejection of external authorities in favor of personal enlightenment, resonated powerfully with warrior ideals while providing intellectual frameworks accommodating both Confucian ethics and indigenous Shinto practices. The construction of major Zen temples under shogunal patronage transformed Kyoto's architectural landscape while establishing institutional centers for cultural development, extending far beyond religious activities. Shokoku-ji, founded by Yoshimitsu in 1382, exemplified ambitious scope of these projects through massive compound, including not only worship halls and meditation spaces, but also libraries, art studios, and guest quarters for visiting scholars and diplomats. The temple's main hall, measuring over 200 feet in length and rising nearly 100 feet high, employed architectural techniques combining traditional Japanese post and beam construction with Chinese innovations in roof design and interior spatial organization. The Golden Pavilion, Kinkakuji, which Yoshimitsu constructed as part of his Kitayama Villa complex beginning in 1397, represented pinnacle of this cultural synthesis through unprecedented integration of residential, religious, and aesthetic functions within single architectural statement. The three-story structure incorporated distinct stylistic elements on each level. Ground floor followed traditional Shindenzukuri palace architecture, favored by court nobles. Second story adopted Bukuzukuri style, associated with warrior residences, while upper level employed purely Zen architectural principles with meditation hall and golden exterior, reflecting seasonal changes in surrounding landscape. The pavilion's famous gold leaf exterior, applied using techniques developed by master craftsmen working with imported Chinese materials, created visual effects changing dramatically throughout day as sunlight struck building from different angles. Morning light produced subtle golden glows, harmonizing with mist rising from adjacent pond, while afternoon sun created brilliant reflections visible from considerable distances across Kyoto's northern hills. The building's positioning within carefully designed gardens, incorporating elements from both Chinese and Japanese landscape traditions, demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how architecture could enhance natural beauty rather than competing with environmental features. Zen influence extended far beyond temple architecture to transform virtually every aspect of Japanese aesthetic expression during early Muromachi period. The tea ceremony's development from simple beverage service into elaborate ritual art form reflected Zen principles of mindfulness, simplicity, and appreciation for subtle beauty found in everyday activities. Zen monk Murata Juko and predecessor masters, working under patronage of wealthy merchants and warrior families, established fundamental procedures governing tea preparation for centuries, while creating philosophical frameworks, elevating practical activities into spiritual exercises. The formalization of tea ceremony protocols involved meticulous attention to every ritual experience aspect, from utensil selection and preparation to seasonal appropriateness of decorative elements and proper participant comportment. Tea masters developed specialized vocabularies describing precise movements, timing, and aesthetic considerations, distinguishing accomplished practitioners from mere dilettantes. The ceremony's emphasis on wabi-sabi aesthetics, finding beauty in imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness, provided philosophical alternatives to ostentatious display, characterizing earlier aristocratic culture while creating new refined taste standards appealing to both warrior and merchant patrons. The rise of merchant guilds during early Muromachi period fundamentally transformed Japan's economic landscape through development of sophisticated commercial networks operating independently of traditional agricultural production and warrior control. The za system, emerging during late Kamakura period as loose associations of craftsmen and traders seeking mutual protection and market advantages, evolved into powerful economic institutions that could negotiate directly with provincial authorities and religious establishments, while maintaining own internal governance structures and quality control standards. Sakai's emergence as Japan's premier commercial center exemplified dramatic changes occurring within merchant class. Located at Yamato River's mouth, where it emptied into Osaka Bay, Sakai possessed natural advantages for maritime trade while maintaining land connections to Kyoto and surrounding Kinai region's agricultural resources. The city's merchant families, many having accumulated substantial wealth through generations of careful commercial activity, began investing in manufacturing enterprises, producing goods specifically for export markets rather than local consumption. The city's sword-making industry achieved international recognition, producing blades combining traditional Japanese metallurgical techniques with innovations learned through contact with Chinese and Korean craftsmen. Sakai swordsmiths developed new forging methods, creating steel with superior flexibility and edge retention compared to conventional Japanese weapons, while polishing techniques produced mirror-like finishes, enhancing both aesthetic appeal and practical performance of finished blades. These weapons commanded premium prices in overseas markets, particularly in China, where Japanese swords were prized by military officers and wealthy collectors appreciating superior craftsmanship. Diplomatic relations with Ming China reached unprecedented sophistication levels during Yoshimitsu's reign through implementation of tally trade system, providing formal frameworks for commercial and cultural exchange between two nations. The Kongo-Boeki arrangements, negotiated through complex diplomatic protocols, requiring careful attention to ceremonial precedent and mutual face-saving, established Japan as tributary state within Chinese world order, while preserving practical independence in domestic affairs. This relationship provided substantial economic benefits through access to Chinese markets and luxury goods, while creating opportunities for cultural exchange, enriching Japanese civilization without compromising distinctive characteristics. The cultural flowering characterizing early Muromachi period came to abrupt and violent end when rival factions within Ashikaga shogunate finally abandoned diplomatic maneuvering in favor of armed conflict during spring 1467. The Onin War, which would devastate Kyoto for next decade, began ostensibly as succession dispute over who would inherit 8th Ashikaga shogun position, but quickly evolved into comprehensive breakdown of political arrangements, maintaining relative stability for nearly 3/4 century. The conflict's immediate trigger involved rivalry between Hosokawa Katsumoto and Yamana Shozen, two of most powerful Shugo daimyo, whose accumulated grievances and territorial ambitions had reached irreconcilable levels by mid-1460s. Hosokawa commanded Eastern Army, initially supporting Ashikaga Yoshimi's claim to succeed his brother Yoshimasa as shogun, while Yamana led Western Army backing infant Yoshihisa, son of Yoshimasa and wife Hino Tomiko. However, these nominal succession issues masked deeper structural problems within shogunal system developing since early 15th century. Shugo daimyo had gradually accumulated territorial holdings and military resources, rivaling or exceeding shogun's own power base, creating a situation where provincial governors possessed capability challenging central authority whenever interests conflicted with shogunal policies. The delicate balance, previously maintaining order, depended on shogun's ability mediating between competing factions while preventing any single daimyo from accumulating overwhelming advantages. But Yoshimasa's political weakness and personal indifference to governance allowed these tensions escalating beyond peaceful resolution. The war's opening phases demonstrated how completely traditional conflict resolution mechanisms had broken down within Japanese political society. Previous disputes between major daimyo families had typically been resolved through shogunal mediation, marriage alliances, or territorial adjustments addressing underlying grievances without requiring extensive military action. The elaborate diplomatic protocols governing relations between warrior families for generations proved utterly inadequate when both sides possessed comparable military strength, and neither was willing accepting compromised solutions, appearing to diminish their status or territorial control. The result was armed conflict on scale Japan hadn't experienced since Genpei War, nearly 3 centuries earlier. The fighting erupting in Kyoto during summer 1467 transformed Japan's ancient capital into battlefield, where heavily armored cavalry charged through streets, previously witnessing only ceremonial processions and religious festivals. Eastern Army established fortified positions in northeastern city sections, constructing elaborate earthworks and palisades, turning residential districts into military compounds, defended by thousands of Ashigaru foot soldiers armed with spears, crossbows, and earliest firearms appearing in Japanese arsenals. Western Army responded by fortifying southwestern quarters, creating defensive network, including not only military installations but also commandeered temples, palaces, and merchant establishments converted into supply depots and barracks for estimated 80,000 warriors, eventually participating in siege. The urban warfare characterizing Onin conflict introduced tactical innovations, profoundly influencing Japanese military development for remainder of medieval period. Traditional cavalry charges proved largely ineffective in narrow streets and confined spaces of capital, forcing commanders relying increasingly on disciplined infantry formations, maintaining cohesion while advancing through debris-filled thoroughfares and defending fixed positions against repeated assaults. The extensive use of fire arrows and incendiary devices created massive conflagrations, destroying entire neighborhoods, including many architectural masterpieces constructed during previous century of cultural achievement. The Golden Pavilion survived only because of isolated location outside main combat zones, but countless temples, palaces, and private residences were reduced to ash during decades of fighting. The war's duration exceeded all contemporary expectations, as neither side possessed decisive military advantages necessary, achieving rapid victory over opponents. Eastern and Western armies maintained roughly equal strength throughout most conflict, with periodic reinforcements from provincial allies, balancing losses suffered during continuous skirmishing, characterizing daily life in besieged capital. The absence of clear strategic objectives beyond elimination of rival factions meant military operations focused on attrition rather than territorial conquest, creating grinding war of endurance, gradually exhausting both sides' resources while producing minimal tactical gains for either faction. Supply problems became increasingly critical as war dragged on through multiple campaign seasons, forcing both armies implementing increasingly desperate measures, maintaining forces in field. The surrounding countryside, traditionally providing agricultural products for Kyoto's population, was systematically devastated by foraging parties, seizing crops, livestock, and stored provisions without regard for rural communities' survival. Peasant families fled villages in massive numbers, seeking refuge in mountain monasteries or distant provinces, where they might escape constant requisitions and military service obligations, making normal agricultural activities impossible. The conflict's resolution in 1477 came not through decisive military victory, but through mutual exhaustion, leaving both factions incapable, continuing effective operations. Hosokawa Katsumoto's death in 1473 had already weakened Eastern Army leadership, while Yamano Shozen's demise following year similarly disrupted Western Army coordination. Their successors lacked both personal authority and financial resources necessary. Maintaining large-scale military operations war required, forcing gradual withdrawals, leaving Kyoto devastated but technically under shogunal control. However, this nominal victory meant little in practical terms, as Ashikaga shogunate emerged from conflict with authority permanently compromised and ability controlling provincial affairs effectively destroyed. The war's aftermath revealed complete collapse of centralized feudal system governing Japan since Kamakura period's establishment in late 12th century. Provincial shugo who'd committed substantial resources supporting either faction found themselves financially ruined and politically isolated, creating power vacuums, quickly filled by local strongmen, possessing military capability and administrative experience necessary for effective regional governance. These emerging Sengoku daimyo differed fundamentally from Shugo predecessors in approach to territorial control and political legitimacy, abandoning fiction of shogunal appointment in favor of direct military conquest and practical administrative competence. The transformation from Shugo to Sengoku daimyo represented more than simple change in titles or administrative procedures. It marked emergence of genuinely independent territorial states, operating according to own laws, maintaining own military forces, and pursuing own diplomatic policies without reference to central authority. Unlike previous system, where provincial governors served as intermediaries between shogun and local warrior communities, new daimyo ruled domains as autonomous sovereigns, acknowledging no superior authority beyond own military capabilities and administrative effectiveness. This fundamental shift in political organization created conditions for a century of warfare defining Sengoku period. Oda Nobunaga's rise to prominence in Owari province during 1550s exemplified new leadership type, emerging from Onin War's destruction of traditional political arrangements. Born into relatively minor branch of Oda family, Nobunaga inherited control over only small portion of Owari when father died in 1551. But innovative military tactics and ruthless political methods enabled consolidating control over entire province within decade. His success stemmed from willingness abandoning conventional warrior practices in favor of whatever methods proved most effective, regardless of compatibility with traditional honor concepts or legitimate authority. Nobunaga's military innovations began with systematic recruitment and training of Ashigaru infantry units, equipped with latest firearms and organized according to principles derived from contemporary European military manuals. Introduction of Portuguese matchlocks to Japan in 1543 had initially been treated as curiosity by most daimyo, continuing relying primarily on traditional weapons and tactics, emphasizing individual skill and personal courage over coordinated group operations. Nobunaga recognized firearms could provide decisive advantages when employed by disciplined formations, delivering concentrated volleys against enemy cavalry or infantry. But effective use required extensive training and standardized equipment most warrior leaders were unwilling providing. The Battle of Nagashino in 1575 demonstrated devastating effectiveness of properly coordinated firearm units when employed against traditional cavalry formations. Nobunaga's Ashigaru, arranged in 3 ranks with rotating firing sequences, maintaining continuous pressure on advancing enemies, decimated mounted samurai, expecting to overwhelm foot soldiers through conventional cavalry charges. The psychological impact of mass gunfire proved as significant as physical effects. Horses trained for traditional battlefield conditions panicked when exposed to unfamiliar sounds and smoke characterizing firearm combat. The result was tactical revolution, forcing all subsequent military leaders reconsidering approach to battlefield organization and equipment procurement. Castle construction techniques underwent equally dramatic transformations as military engineers developed new fortification designs, capable withstanding both traditional siege methods and emerging threat posed by artillery weapons. Hilltop fortresses characterizing earlier defensive architecture proved vulnerable to cannon fire, breaching stone walls, and wooden palisades with relative ease, forcing architects developing more sophisticated defensive planning approaches incorporating multiple defensive lines, concealed firing positions, and elaborate systems of interlocking fields of fire, maximizing defensive advantages while minimizing exposure to enemy bombardment. Azuchi Castle, which Nobunaga began constructing in 1576 on Lake Biwa shores, represented pinnacle of these architectural innovations through unprecedented combination of defensive effectiveness and symbolic grandeur. The massive stone foundation rising over 100 feet above, surrounding terrain employed advanced masonry techniques, creating walls capable withstanding direct artillery bombardment while providing stable platforms for castle's own defensive weapons. The complex arrangement of courtyards, gates, and defensive positions forced attacking armies advancing through predetermined killing zones where defenders could concentrate fire while remaining protected from return volleys. The proliferation of similar castle construction projects throughout Japan during late 16th century reflected increasing resources successful daimyo could devote to both military and ceremonial purposes as territorial control expanded and administrative systems became more sophisticated. These massive building projects required coordination between multiple specialized crafts, stonemasons, carpenters, metal workers, artists, while demanding logistical capabilities transporting enormous material quantities across considerable distances. Successful completion of such undertakings demonstrated daimyo organizational competence while creating permanent symbols of their authority, visible from great distances across their domains. The economic foundations supporting these military and architectural innovations depended on agricultural improvements and commercial developments, generating unprecedented surplus wealth levels for investment in military modernization. Introduction of new rice varieties from China and Korea, combined with improved irrigation techniques and more intensive cultivation methods, increased agricultural productivity, sufficiently supporting larger non-agricultural populations, while providing tax revenues necessary, maintaining professional military forces. The fragmented political landscape emerging from Onin War's devastation created unprecedented opportunities for ambitious military leaders, possessing both vision, imagining unified national control, and practical capabilities necessary, transforming such dreams into reality. By 1573, when Oda Nobunaga finally succeeded driving last Ashikaga shogun from Kyoto, traditional feudal order had been so thoroughly discredited, even pretense of central authority had become meaningless. Provincial daimyo ruled territories as independent kingdoms, maintaining own laws, currencies, and military forces, while engaging in constant warfare, preventing any single power achieving decisive dominance. Into this chaos stepped three remarkable figures whose combined efforts would fundamentally transform Japan from collection of warring states into unified nation under centralized control. Nobunaga's approach to military conquest differed radically from conventional warrior practices through systematic employment of overwhelming force against any opposition, regardless of religious or political character. Where previous military leaders typically sought minimizing casualties and preserving existing social structures while achieving immediate objectives, Nobunaga demonstrated ruthless willingness, destroying entire institutions if they posed obstacles to expansion plans. His campaigns against Ikko-Ikki religious communities during 1570s exemplified this approach through unprecedented scale and thoroughness, as forces systematically eliminated not only armed resistance, but also economic and social foundations, sustaining these Buddhist confederations for generations. The siege of Ishiyama Honganji, lasting from 1570 to 1580, represented most sustained military operation of Nobunaga's career and demonstrated capacity for long-term strategic planning, coordinating multiple objectives simultaneously. The fortress temple complex, located at Yodo River's mouth where it emptied into Osaka Bay, commanded crucial transportation routes, while serving as administrative center for Jodo Shinshu Buddhist communities throughout central Japan. The temple's massive defensive works, constructed over several decades using donations from thousands of faithful believers, included stone walls over 30 feet high, multiple moats fed by river water, and elaborate systems of underground tunnels, allowing defenders moving reinforcements and supplies without exposure to enemy fire. Nobunaga's assault on this stronghold required innovations in siege warfare, combining traditional Japanese methods with techniques adapted from European military manuals brought by Portuguese missionaries and traders. His engineers constructed massive earthworks, gradually extending closer to temple walls, while providing protected positions for artillery pieces and firearm units, maintaining continuous pressure on defenders. The use of naval blockades preventing supply shipments reaching besieged garrison represented level of strategic coordination few Japanese commanders had previously attempted, requiring cooperation between land forces and specially constructed warships, operating effectively in confined Osaka Bay waters. The fortress's eventual surrender resulted not from successful assault, but from systematic strangulation of supply lines and gradual erosion of defender morale through constant bombardment and knowledge that no relief force would arrive breaking siege. The destruction of Enryaku-ji Temple on Mount Hiei in 1571 provided even more dramatic demonstration of Nobunaga's willingness, employing unprecedented violence against religious institutions challenging his authority. The ancient Buddhist monastery, maintaining independence for over 800 years, through combination of spiritual prestige and military power, commanded strategic positions overlooking Kyoto while controlling vast landed estates throughout surrounding provinces. The temple's warrior monks Sohei had intervened repeatedly in political conflicts during late Heian and Kamakura periods, using military capabilities, influencing succession disputes, and policy decisions affecting institutional interests. Nobunaga's assault on Mount Hiei began before dawn on September 30th, 1571, when approximately 30,000 troops surrounded Mountain and began systematic destruction of every building, religious artifact, and human being they encountered. The operation's scope exceeded anything in Japanese military history, as Nobunaga's forces burned over 3,000 structures while killing estimated 4,000 monks, servants, and pilgrims seeking sanctuary within temple complex. The complete elimination of this ancient institution, considered inviolable by previous military leaders, sent unmistakable messages to other religious establishments about consequences of opposing Nobunaga's expansion plans. The psychological impact of these religious campaigns extended far beyond immediate military objectives to transform contemporary understanding of legitimate authority and acceptable political control methods. Traditional Japanese warfare had operated according to implicit rules protecting certain non-combatant categories, while preserving religious institutions, providing spiritual services to both sides in any conflict. Nobunaga's systematic violation of these conventions demonstrated effective power could override traditional constraints when wielded by leaders possessing sufficient military capability and political determination, ignoring conventional behavior limitations. The technological innovations enabling these military successes reflected Nobunaga's systematic approach to adopting and improving foreign weapons and tactics, providing decisive advantages over enemies remaining committed to traditional methods. His firearms units, initially organized according to Portuguese military manuals, evolved through practical experience into uniquely Japanese formations combining European discipline with indigenous tactical flexibility. The development of specialized ammunition types, including incendiary rounds designed starting fires in wooden fortifications and explosive shells breaching stone walls, required technical expertise Nobunaga cultivated through generous patronage of craftsmen and engineers, solving specific military problems. The establishment of centralized armament production facilities represented another crucial innovation, distinguishing Nobunaga's military organization from conventional daimyo armies, relying on individual warriors providing own equipment. The massive workshops constructed at Kunitomo and other strategic locations employed hundreds of specialized craftsmen, producing standardized weapons, armor, and ammunition according to precise specifications, ensuring uniform quality and component interchangeability. These facilities required substantial capital investments and sophisticated management systems, but provided military advantages justifying costs through improved battlefield performance and reduced logistical complications during extended campaigns. Nobunaga's administrative innovations proved equally revolutionary in departure from traditional feudal practices and emphasis on practical efficiency over hereditary privilege or ceremonial precedent. His appointment of capable administrators, regardless of social background or family connections, created governmental systems responding effectively to rapidly changing military and political circumstances, while maintaining detailed record-keeping necessary for managing complex territorial holdings. The implementation of standardized weights, measures, and currency systems throughout expanding domain facilitated commercial activities while providing economic integration necessary, supporting large-scale military operations across multiple provinces. The systematic land surveys Nobunaga ordered in conquered territories provided precise information about agricultural productivity, population distribution, and resource availability, enabling more efficient tax collection, while eliminating traditional privileges and exemptions characterizing previous feudal system. These surveys, conducted by teams of specially trained officials, measuring fields with standardized instruments and recording findings in uniform formats, created comprehensive databases, allowing central administrators making informed decisions about resource allocation and military planning. Toyotomi Hideyoshi's rise from Ashigaru foot soldier to supreme military commander exemplified social mobility becoming possible under Nobunaga's merit-based administrative system, while subsequent policies as national hegemon reflected both continuation and modification of former master's revolutionary governance approaches. Born into peasant family in Owari province, Hideyoshi possessed no hereditary claim to warrior status or territorial authority, but exceptional intelligence and administrative capabilities enabled advancing through Nobunaga's military hierarchy until commanding major independent operations. His success capturing Takamatsu Castle in 1582 through innovative technique of flooding fortress by damming nearby river demonstrated tactical creativity characterizing entire career. Nobunaga's assassination at Honnoji Temple in June 1582 created succession crisis. Hideyoshi resolved, through combination of military action and political maneuvering, establishing him as dominant figure among Nobunaga's former vassals. His victory over Akechi Mitsuhide at Battle of Yamazaki, achieved through forced marches, bringing army from distant Bichu province to Kyoto area in unprecedented time, demonstrated both strategic understanding and troops' exceptional discipline and loyalty. The subsequent negotiations with other Nobunaga generals, particularly Shibata Katsui and Tokugawa Ieyasu, required diplomatic skills, enabling Hideyoshi forging coalitions while isolating potential rivals, challenging emerging authority. The completion of national unification under Hideyoshi's leadership involved military campaigns, systematically eliminating remaining independent daimyo, while implementing administrative reforms, preventing future central authority. Fragmentation. His conquest of Kyushu during 1586 to 1587 required coordinating multiple armies across difficult terrain, while negotiating complex political relationships between local powers, maintaining independence through centuries of shifting alliances and territorial disputes. The Shimazu family's final submission at Kagoshima marked autonomous rule's end in Japan's southernmost regions, while demonstrating Hideyoshi's capacity, projecting military power across vast distances despite significant logistical challenges. The Siege of Odawara in 1590 represented unification campaign's culmination through elimination of Hojo family, last major daimyo house, maintaining effective independence from central control. The massive fortress complex Hojo, constructed in Kanto region, incorporated most advanced defensive technologies available, including multiple defensive lines, sophisticated water management systems, and provisions withstanding extended sieges. Hideyoshi's successful reduction of this stronghold required mobilizing over 200,000 troops while coordinating naval operations, preventing supply shipments reaching besieged garrison through coastal routes. The implementation of sword hunt policy, beginning in 1588, represented Hideyoshi's most significant departure from traditional warrior practices through systematic disarmament of non-samurai population and rigid enforcement of class distinctions defining Japanese social organization for next 3 centuries. The Katanagari orders required all farmers, artisans, and merchants surrendering weapons to government officials, melting down collected swords and spears to provide metal for constructing massive Buddha statue at Kyoto's Hokoji Temple. This policy served multiple purposes, eliminating potential armed resistance sources to central authority, while creating clear legal distinctions between warrior class and other social groups. The prohibition of sword-wearing, formally implemented through Haito Edict of the 28th of March, 1876, represented most symbolically significant assault on samurai identity through elimination of visible markers, distinguishing warrior class from other social groups for centuries. The katana and wakizashi samurai, wore as status symbols and professional instruments, became illegal accessories, marking bearers as criminals subject to arrest and punishment by police forces, increasingly including former commoners armed with modern weapons and legal authority. The Korean invasions Hideyoshi launched in 1592 reflected grandiose ambitions for continental expansion, while demonstrating both military capabilities Japanese unification created and logistical limitations, ultimately dooming these overseas adventures. The initial invasion force of approximately 160,000 troops represented largest military expedition in Japanese history, requiring unprecedented coordination between multiple daimyo armies while maintaining supply lines across hundreds of ocean miles. The rapid conquest of Seoul and Pyongyang during campaign's opening months demonstrated Japanese military superiority over Korean forces not experiencing major warfare for generations. However, Ming Chinese Army's intervention, beginning early 1593, transformed conflict from conquest campaign into prolonged war of attrition, straining Japanese resources while producing minimal strategic gains. Chinese forces, numbering over 100,000 experienced troops, equipped with advanced artillery and supported by extensive supply networks, possessed military capabilities matching or exceeding Japanese invaders. The resulting stalemate forced Japanese armies maintaining defensive positions in hostile territory while dealing with constant harassment from Korean guerrilla forces and regular attacks from combined Chinese-Korean armies. The naval warfare characterizing much Korean conflict revealed significant weaknesses in Japanese maritime capabilities, despite advantages in land combat. Korean Admiral Yi Sun-sin's innovative turtle ships, equipped with iron plating and advanced artillery pieces, proved devastatingly effective against Japanese transport vessels and warships designed primarily for coastal operations rather than extended naval campaigns. The destruction of Japanese supply fleets at battles such as Hansando Island severely compromised invasion armies' logistical support, while demonstrating crucial importance of naval superiority for overseas military operations. Tokugawa Ieyasu's emergence as dominant figure following Hideyoshi's death in 1598 resulted from careful positioning during Korean campaigns and subsequent political maneuvering during succession crisis dividing Hideyoshi's former vassals into competing factions. Unlike other major daimyo committing substantial resources to overseas adventures, Ieyasu maintained most forces in Japan while providing only minimal support for Korean operations. This strategic restraint preserved military strength and financial resources, while other potential rivals exhausted themselves in futile continental warfare. The Battle of Sekigahara on October 21st, 1600, determined unified Japan's political future through single decisive engagement lasting less than 6 hours, but involving over 150,000 warriors, representing virtually every major daimyo family in country. The battlefield, located in narrow valley between mountains, controlling main transportation route between eastern and western Japan, provided tactical advantages Ieyasu exploited through careful force positioning and successful negotiations with potential enemies, switching sides at crucial fighting moments. The Eastern Army Ieyasu commanded included not only hereditary Tokugawa vassals, but also former Toyotomi supporters, concluding interests lay with emerging victor rather than Ishida Mitsunari's Western Army coalition. The defection of Kobayakawa Hideaki and several other Western commanders at battle's climax transformed what might have been closely contested engagement into complete rout, eliminating organized resistance to Tokugawa authority. The systematic pursuit and destruction of fleeing Western Army units ensured no significant military force remained challenging Ieyasu's claim to national supremacy. The establishment of Edo shogunate in 1603 represented culmination of 30 years' revolutionary change, transforming Japan from independent territories collection into unified nation under centralized military control. Ieyasu's decision, locating capital at Edo, relatively small fishing village on Kanto Plain's eastern edge, reflected both strategic considerations about controlling Japan's most productive agricultural region and symbolic recognition that new political order would differ fundamentally from previous arrangements, maintaining ceremonial connections to Kyoto's imperial court. The transformation of Edo from modest fishing settlement into administrative center of unified Japan required unprecedented urban planning and construction projects reshaping physical landscape while establishing institutional foundations. For 3 centuries of Tokugawa rule, when Ieyasu first surveyed marshy terrain surrounding Edo Bay in 1590, he envisioned not merely regional stronghold, but purpose-built capital, accommodating complex administrative machinery, necessary governing nation of approximately 28 million people. The massive earth-moving operations beginning immediately after Sekigahara involved redirecting rivers, draining swamplands, and constructing artificial islands, providing stable foundations for castle complex and surrounding urban districts housing shogunal bureaucracy. The architectural centerpiece of this transformation was Edo Castle itself, fortress complex dwarfing even Hideyoshi's magnificent Osaka castle, through systematic integration of defensive capabilities with administrative functions on unprecedented scale. The castle's spiral design forced visitors traversing multiple defensive rings while ascending gradually towards central keep, creating physical manifestation of hierarchical authority, reinforcing political relationships through spatial organization. The massive stone foundations, some individual blocks weighing over 10 tons, were transported from quarries hundreds of miles away, using specially constructed barges and road networks, demonstrating Tokugawa regime's capacity. Coordinating large-scale engineering projects across multiple provinces. The implementation of Senken Kotai system, beginning in 1635, represented most ingenious mechanism for controlling daimyo autonomy, while simultaneously developing infrastructure and economic integration, necessary maintaining centralized authority. Under these regulations, all daimyo were required maintaining permanent residences in Edo, where they'd spend alternate years in attendance upon shogun, while wives and children remained as permanent hostages in capital, regardless of husband's and father's location. This system transformed potential military rivals into court nobles, whose status depended on ability navigating complex ceremonial protocols while competing for shogunal favor through loyalty displays and cultural sophistication. The logistical requirements of Senken Kotai created massive transportation networks, connecting every corner of Japan to Tokugawa capital through regularly maintained highways, designed accommodating elaborate processions, accompanying daimyo movements between domains and Edo residences. The Tokaido, principal route connecting Edo with Kyoto and Osaka, required constant maintenance of 53 post stations providing accommodation, fresh horses, and supplies for thousands of travelers using highway each month. Each daimyo procession included not only Lord himself, but hundreds of retainers, servants, and guards whose numbers reflected master's status, while creating economic opportunities for innkeepers, merchants, and craftsmen along route. The financial burden of maintaining dual residences while funding elaborate travel ceremonies effectively prevented daimyo accumulating resources necessary for military challenges to central authority. A typical Sankin Kotai procession for major daimyo required several hundred participants, dozens of horses, and carefully coordinated logistics consuming substantial portions of domain revenues. The Maeda family of Kaga province, among wealthiest daimyo houses, spent estimated 40% annual income on Edo residence expenses and travel costs, leaving insufficient resources for military modernization or territorial expansion, threatening Tokugawa supremacy. The cultural dimensions of Sanken Kotai proved equally significant in transforming warrior society from military class focused on combat readiness into bureaucratic elite, whose status depended on administrative competence and cultural refinement. Daimyo residences in Edo became centers of artistic patronage and intellectual activity, where provincial lords competed, demonstrating sophistication through tea ceremony mastery, poetry composition, and scholarly pursuits previously associated primarily with court nobility. The establishment of four-class system provided ideological framework for social hierarchy, legitimizing Tokugawa authority while preventing emergence of alternative power centers challenging established order. The official ranking of samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants reflected Neo-Confucian principles, valuing productive labor over commercial activity while maintaining clear distinctions between rulers and subjects. This theoretical framework, derived from Chinese political philosophy but adapted to Japanese circumstances, provided intellectual justification for existing social arrangements while creating legal categories enforceable through government regulation and social pressure. The practical implementation of class distinctions required extensive bureaucratic machinery, monitoring compliance with regulations governing everything from clothing styles and residential architecture to marriage partners, occupational choices. Sumptuary laws specified appropriate fabrics, colors, and decorative elements for each social class, while prohibiting adoption of styles associated with higher status groups. Farmers were restricted to cotton and hemp clothing in subdued colors, while merchants faced particularly detailed restrictions preventing displaying wealth through conspicuous consumption, challenging samurai social superiority despite inferior economic circumstances. The transformation of samurai from professional warriors into civilian bureaucrats represented one of most significant social changes in Japanese history, requiring fundamental alterations in education, lifestyle, and cultural values defining warrior identity for centuries. The elimination of warfare as regular feature of Japanese life meant traditional military skills became largely ceremonial accomplishments rather than practical necessities, forcing samurai families developing alternative status and income sources, justifying privileged position within social hierarchy. The development of castle towns throughout Japan created urban environments where samurai could pursue bureaucratic careers while maintaining social distinction from merchant and artisan populations. These planned communities, constructed around daimyo residences according to standardized layouts reflecting Confucian social organization principles, provided employment opportunities for educated samurai serving as administrators, teachers, and technical specialists within domain governments. The implementation of sakoku policies, beginning in 1630s, reflected Tokugawa concerns about foreign influences, potentially destabilizing carefully constructed social and political order emerging from decades of civil warfare. The exclusion of European missionaries and severe restriction of international trade represented systematic attempts controlling information flow and preventing introduction of ideas or technologies challenging existing authority structures. The persecution of Christian communities, culminating in Shimabara Rebellion of 1637 to 1638, demonstrated regime's willingness employing extreme violence against religious movements, offering alternative loyalty and authority sources. The destruction of Hara Castle during Shimabara siege required mobilizing over 100,000 troops against approximately 27,000 Christian rebels, fortifying themselves in abandoned fortress on Shimabara Peninsula. The rebels, primarily peasants and ronin, driven to desperation by excessive taxation and religious persecution, demonstrated remarkable military competence despite inferior numbers and equipment. Their effective use of firearms and disciplined defensive tactics prolonged siege for several months, while inflicting substantial casualties on government forces, expecting rapid victory over poorly armed insurgents. The rebellion's suppression marked Christian influence's end in Japan, while establishing precedents for dealing with religious and social movements challenging Tokugawa authority. The systematic execution of captured rebels, including women and children participating in defense, demonstrated regime's determination eliminating any trace of Christian organizational belief. The subsequent prohibition of all Christian literature and religious artifacts, combined with requirement that all Japanese families register with Buddhist temples, created surveillance mechanisms, detecting and preventing forbidden religious practices revival. The restriction of foreign trade to single port of Nagasaki, where Dutch and Chinese merchants operated under strict government supervision, enabled Tokugawa regime controlling flow of foreign goods and ideas, while maintaining access to essential imports such as silk, sugar, and medicinal products. The artificial island of Dejima, constructed specifically to house Dutch traders, created controlled environment where international commerce could continue without allowing foreign influences penetrating Japanese society. The elaborate regulations governing these trade relationships specified acceptable goods, limited foreign resident numbers, and required detailed reporting of all commercial transactions to government officials. The growth of domestic commerce during early Edo period reflected peace and stability Tokugawa policies created while demonstrating economic potential, realizable through effective governance and social order. The elimination of warfare and standardization of weights, measures, and currency systems facilitated trade between different regions while reducing transaction costs, previously limiting commercial development. The construction of improved transportation networks, including both highways and coastal shipping routes, enabled merchants moving goods efficiently across long distances while creating integrated markets, supporting specialized production and regional economic development. The emergence of Osaka as Japan's commercial center reflected city's strategic location at intersection of major transportation routes while demonstrating economic integration characterizing early Edo period. The city's rice market became national center for grain trading, with prices established in Osaka serving as benchmarks for agricultural transactions throughout Japan. The development of sophisticated financial instruments, including promissory notes and credit arrangements, enabling long-distance trade without physical currency. Transportation created banking systems, supporting increasingly complex commercial relationships between merchants in different regions. The urbanization accompanying commercial development created new social environments where traditional class boundaries became more fluid, despite official regulations maintaining legal distinctions between social groups. Edo's population grew from approximately 100,000 inches, 1,600, to over 1 million by 1700, making it one of the world's largest cities, while creating unprecedented concentrations of people from different social backgrounds living in close proximity. The development of distinct urban districts catering to different social classes created opportunities for cultural exchange and economic cooperation, transcending official social boundaries while maintaining appearance of hierarchical order. The entertainment districts emerging in major cities provided venues where merchants, artisans, and even samurai could interact in environments, temporarily suspending normal social restrictions while creating new forms of cultural expression, reflecting urban sensibilities. The development of kabuki theater, ukiyo-e woodblock printing, and other popular arts reflected aesthetic preferences and economic capabilities of urban populations, possessing both leisure time and disposable income, necessary supporting professional entertainers and artists. These cultural innovations created distinctly Japanese art forms, combining traditional techniques with contemporary themes, while appealing to audiences including members of multiple social classes. The Genroku period, spanning roughly 1688 to 1704, marked emergence of distinctly urban culture, challenging traditional assumptions about social hierarchy, while creating new artistic expression forms, reflecting economic vitality and intellectual sophistication of Japan's growing merchant communities. The concentration of wealth in major cities, particularly Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto, generated unprecedented demand for entertainment, luxury goods, and cultural refinement that could no longer be satisfied by austere aesthetic traditions associated with samurai culture or formal ceremonial practices of imperial court. The development of kabuki theater represented revolutionary departure from highly stylized no drama dominating Japanese theatrical tradition for centuries, where no performances appealed primarily to educated elites possessing classical learning necessary, appreciating subtle literary allusions and symbolic representations. Kabuki emerged as popular entertainment form, combining spectacular visual effects with contemporary social commentary in ways resonating with urban audiences, regardless of educational background or social status. The elaborate costumes featuring brilliant silk fabrics dyed in colors, violating sumptuary laws, restricting commoners' dress, created visual spectacles, challenging official social boundaries while demonstrating economic power of merchant patrons funding these productions. The emergence of ukiyo-e woodblock printing as major art form reflected both technological innovations in printing techniques and development of mass markets for affordable artistic reproductions, bringing sophisticated visual culture within reach of ordinary urban residents. The term ukiyo, literally floating world, captured ephemeral nature of contemporary urban life while celebrating pleasures and experiences characterizing merchant society during this period of unprecedented prosperity. Artists like Hishikawa Moronobu pioneered techniques for creating single-sheet prints produced in large quantities while maintaining artistic quality, sufficient, satisfying, discriminating collectors, appreciating both aesthetic merit and technical excellence. The collaborative nature of ukiyo-e production involved complex relationships between artists, creating original designs, carvers translating these images into wooden printing blocks, and publishers coordinating entire process while marketing finished prints to diverse audiences with varying aesthetic preferences and financial capabilities. The most successful publishers developed sophisticated understanding of market demand, commissioning print series featuring popular actors, beautiful courtesans, or scenic locations, appealing to specific customer segments while maintaining production schedules, responding quickly to changing fashion trends or current events, capturing public attention. The subject matter of ukiyo-e prints reflected social dynamics and cultural interests of urban society during High Edo period, documenting everything from theatrical performances and pleasure quarter activities to seasonal festivals and famous scenic locations, becoming popular destinations for domestic tourism. The bijinga genre, featuring portraits of beautiful women, created idealized representations of feminine beauty, influencing fashion trends and aesthetic standards, while providing insights into contemporary social attitudes about gender, roles, and sexual relationships. These prints often depicted courtesans and geisha, whose elaborate hairstyles, makeup techniques, and clothing choices represented height of urban sophistication, while challenging conventional moral standards through celebration of pleasure and sensual experience. The economic foundations supporting this cultural flowering reflected fundamental changes in Japan's productive capacity and commercial organization occurring during previous century of peace and political stability. Agricultural improvements, including introduction of new rice varieties from China and development of more efficient irrigation systems, increased food production, sufficiently supporting growing urban populations while generating surpluses. Investable in manufacturing and commercial activities, the expansion of cultivated land through reclamation projects, draining swamps, and terracing hillsides added millions of acres to Japan's agricultural base, while creating employment opportunities for rural populations that might otherwise have migrated to cities seeking economic opportunities. The proto-industrialization emerging during this period involved development of manufacturing systems combining traditional craft techniques with organizational innovations, achieving economies of scale while maintaining quality standards satisfying discriminating consumers. The textile industry in regions like Nishigen near Kyoto employed thousands of skilled weavers, producing silk fabrics of extraordinary complexity and beauty, using techniques refined over generations of artistic development. The cultural prosperity and economic vitality characterizing High Edo period began showing strained signs. By early 19th century, as series of interconnected crises exposed fundamental weaknesses in Tokugawa system remaining hidden during previous century of unprecedented stability. The rigid social hierarchy and closed economic system, enabling Japan's remarkable cultural flowering, now appeared increasingly inadequate for addressing complex challenges emerging from both internal demographic pressures and external threats, ultimately proving impossible to ignore or deflect through traditional diplomatic means. The Tenpo famine of 1833 to 1837 represented most severe subsistence crisis Japan experienced since Tokugawa rule establishment, affecting virtually every archipelago region through combination of climatic disasters and administrative failures, revealing dangerous vulnerability of Japan's agricultural foundation. The crisis began with abnormally cold temperatures and excessive rainfall during crucial summer growing seasons of 1833 and 1834 conditions, exacerbated by volcanic ash from Mount Asama's eruption, blocking sunlight and damaging crops across northeastern Honshu. The resulting harvest failures reduced rice production by estimated 30–40% in most severely affected regions, while creating cascading effects, disrupting food distribution networks, and causing commodity prices fluctuating wildly throughout country. The government's response to these agricultural disasters demonstrated both administrative capabilities Tokugawa regime developed over 2 centuries and inherent limitations of system prioritizing political stability over economic flexibility. Domain authorities implemented traditional famine relief measures, including distribution of stored rice reserves and temporary suspension of tax collection in most severely affected areas. But these efforts proved insufficient addressing crisis scale. Rural communities throughout northeastern Japan experienced social upheaval, challenging fundamental assumptions about peasant compliance and social order underpinning Tokugawa governance since early 17th century. Desperate farming families abandoned villages in massive numbers, seeking survival through migration to urban areas or less affected rural regions where they might find employment or charitable assistance. These population movements created administrative chaos as local officials struggled maintaining accurate household registers while dealing with unprecedented numbers of displaced persons falling outside normal social classification and bureaucratic control categories. The urban consequences of rural distress manifested in rice riots, erupting simultaneously in dozens of cities throughout Japan during spring and summer 1837, demonstrating coordinated popular resistance level not seen since early Tokugawa rule years. The Oshio Heihachiro rebellion in Osaka exemplified dangerous potential for social unrest when economic crisis coincided with principled opposition to government policies from within samurai class itself. Oshio, former magistrate and Confucian scholar, convinced that official corruption and indifference to popular suffering violated moral foundations of legitimate governance, organized armed uprising, briefly seizing control of significant portions of Japan's commercial capital before being suppressed through massive military intervention. The rebellion's suppression required mobilizing over 10,000 troops equipped with artillery and firearms against approximately 300 insurgents, fortifying themselves in Osaka's commercial districts, while attempting distributing confiscated rice supplies to starving urban residents. The fighting lasted 3 days and resulted in destruction of nearly 1/4 of city's buildings through fires spreading from initial combat zones to consume entire neighborhoods of wooden structures constructed without adequate fire prevention consideration. The arrival of foreign ships in Japanese waters during early 19th century transformed these domestic political tensions into urgent national security concerns, requiring immediate responses despite regimes' lack of experience dealing with technologically advanced foreign powers. When Commodore Matthew Perry's squadron entered Edo Bay on July 8, 1853, the sight of 4 heavily armed steamships advancing against wind through waters Japanese coastal defenses were designed, protecting, and created immediate recognition that Japan faced unprecedented challenges requiring responses transcending traditional diplomatic and military capabilities. The black ships of Perry's vessels, with towering smokestacks and obvious technological superiority over anything in Japanese arsenals, provided unmistakable evidence that outside world had developed capabilities, making Japan's isolation policies both obsolete and dangerous to maintain. Perry's initial demands for fuel, provisions, and protection for shipwrecked sailors appeared relatively modest compared to comprehensive commercial treaties European powers imposed on China, but Japanese officials recognized accepting any foreign demands would establish precedents, leading to progressively greater concessions and eventual loss of national independence. The American Commodore's presentation of President Fillmore's letter, delivered with elaborate ceremony demonstrating both respect for Japanese sovereignty and implicit threats about non-compliance consequences, created diplomatic dilemmas. Tokugawa government was institutionally unprepared, addressing through existing decision-making procedures. The year-long deliberation period Perry allowed before returning for definitive response provided opportunities for extensive consultation between shogunate and various daimyo, whose cooperation would be essential implementing any agreement with foreign powers. This consultation process, unprecedented in Tokugawa administrative history, revealed profound disagreements about appropriate responses to foreign pressure, while exposing regime's inability achieving consensus among key stakeholders about fundamental policy directions. The Treaty of Kanagawa, signed March 31, 1854, represented carefully crafted compromise, addressing American demands while attempting minimizing departures from traditional Japanese policies regarding foreign contact and commercial relationships. The agreement opened 2 ports to American vessels seeking supplies and assistance, while establishing consular representation handling future diplomatic issues without requiring direct negotiations between governments. However, treaty provisions for most favored nation treatment ensured any additional concessions granted other foreign powers would automatically extend to United States, creating mechanisms for progressive erosion of Japanese control over own commercial and diplomatic policies. The domestic political consequences of Kanagawa Agreement proved far more significant than immediate practical effects, as shogunates' decision signing treaty with foreign powers without imperial approval created constitutional crisis, challenging fundamental assumptions about legitimate authority within Japanese political system. Emperor Komei's strong opposition to foreign treaties provided focal point for critics arguing Tokugawa regime exceeded legitimate authority while violating sacred obligations, preserving Japan's divine sovereignty against foreign presence. Contamination. The emergence of Sono-jōi slogan, combining reverence for imperial authority with demands for expelling foreign barbarians, created ideological frameworks, uniting diverse opposition groups around shared commitments to imperial restoration and national independence. The political crisis erupting over Harris Treaty ratification in 1858 revealed complete breakdown of consensus within Tokugawa government, while demonstrating regime's inability maintaining effective control over increasingly assertive daimyo, possessing own opinions about appropriate responses to foreign pressure. Inosuke's decision signing treaty without imperial approval, while simultaneously purging political opponents through Ansei Purge, created unprecedented political violence levels, culminating in his assassination outside Edo Castle, March 24, 1860. The successful attack by 18 Ronin from Mito Domain, carried out in broad daylight within sight of shogunal residence, demonstrated even highest government officials were vulnerable to political violence when policies violated strongly held convictions about legitimate authority and national honor. The escalating political violence characterizing 1860s reflected complete polarization of Japanese political opinion around irreconcilable positions regarding foreign relations and domestic governance, making peaceful conflict resolution increasingly impossible. The gradual recognition among opposition leaders that successful resistance to foreign pressure required national unity under more effective leadership than Tokugawa regime could provide, created opportunities for political coalitions, transcending traditional domain boundaries and ideological differences. The Satsuma Choshu Alliance of 1866, mediated by Sakamoto Ryoma, despite two domains' long history of mutual hostility, demonstrated practical considerations about national survival, could overcome regional rivalries when stakes were sufficiently high. This alliance provided military foundation for final assault on Tokugawa authority, while creating institutional frameworks supporting alternative national governance forms based on imperial restoration rather than warrior rule. The Boshin War, beginning January 1868, represented culmination of 15 years' political crisis, steadily undermining Tokugawa legitimacy while creating alternative authority centers, challenging regime's claim, representing legitimate Japanese government. The Battle of Toba Fushimi, opening military phase of imperial restoration movement, demonstrated shogunate's military forces were no longer capable, maintaining effective resistance against determined opposition, possessing both superior morale and increasingly sophisticated military organization. The rapid collapse of Tokugawa resistance in central Japan, followed by peaceful surrender of Edo Castle in April 1868, marked end of nearly 7 centuries of warrior rule, while creating opportunities for comprehensive political transformation under imperial auspices. The imperial forces' decisive victory at Toba Fushimi shattered military foundations of Tokugawa authority, but political transformation following required systematic dismantling of institutional structures governing Japan for over 2.5 centuries. The new Meiji government, operating initially from temporary Kyoto headquarters before relocating to renamed capital of Tokyo, faced monumental challenge of replacing feudal administration with modern governmental systems capable defending national independence, while implementing comprehensive reforms necessary competing with Western powers on equal terms. The Charter Oath, proclaimed by Emperor Meiji on April 6, 1868, outlined ambitious principles for national transformation, including establishment of deliberative assemblies, pursuit of knowledge from around world, and abandonment of evil customs of past. But translating these ideals into practical policies required navigating complex political relationships between former enemies united only temporarily around shared opposition to Tokugawa rule. The abolition of Han system on August 29, 1871, represented most radical transformation in Japanese political organization since Kamakura shogunate establishment 7 centuries earlier. The replacement of approximately 260 semi-autonomous domains with 72 prefectures under direct central government control eliminated feudal territorial structure, providing foundation for warrior rule while creating administrative uniformity, supporting national policies regarding taxation, military service, and legal procedures. The transformation of samurai class presented even greater challenges than administrative reorganization because it required fundamental changes in identity and economic foundation of approximately 400,000 warrior families, defining themselves through military service and social privilege for generations. The abolition of samurai stipends, implemented gradually between 1873 and 1876, eliminated hereditary income, supporting warrior families since Tokugawa's system establishment, while forcing former samurai seeking alternative livelihood sources in increasingly competitive economic environment. The prohibition of sword-wearing formally implemented through Haito Edict of March 28, 1876, represented most symbolically significant assault on samurai identity through elimination of visible markers, distinguishing warrior class from other social groups for centuries. The resistance to these reforms culminated in series of samurai rebellions testing new government's military capabilities while demonstrating depth of opposition to elimination of traditional warrior privileges. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Saigo Takamori, who'd been one of Meiji Restoration's most prominent leaders, represented largest and most serious challenge to new government's authority, while symbolizing fundamental incompatibility between traditional samurai values and modern state requirements. Saigo's army, of approximately 40,000 former samurai from Kyushu domains, employed traditional weapons and tactics against government forces, including peasant conscripts armed with modern rifles and supported by artillery. Units trained according to Western military principles. The siege of Kumamoto Castle, lasting 53 days during spring 1877, demonstrated both tactical skill and ultimate futility of samurai resistance against opponents possessing superior numbers, equipment, and logistical support. The rebellion's conclusion at Battle of Shiroyama on September 24, 1877, marked final defeat of organized samurai resistance to Meiji modernization, while providing dramatic illustration of transformation Japanese society had undergone during previous decade. Saigo's final charge, with approximately 400 surviving followers against government positions, defended by thousands of conscript soldiers equipped with modern weapons, represented deliberate choice of death over surrender, reflecting traditional warrior values while acknowledging impossibility of victory against modernization forces. Picture that last morning, Saigo Takamori, the last samurai, wounded multiple times, unable to continue fighting. His men, the remnants of proud warrior tradition stretching back centuries, prepare for final charge they know is suicide. Government forces with modern rifles wait in prepared positions. At dawn, the samurai charge one last time. Within minutes, it's over. Saigo commits seppuku rather than face capture. His head is taken to prevent desecration. The samurai as political and military force die with him on that hillside. The battle's outcome, with complete destruction of rebel force and Saigo's ritual suicide, eliminated last significant military threat to Meiji government, while creating martyred hero whose memory would influence Japanese nationalism for generations. The establishment of universal military conscription through military service law of January 10, 1873, fundamentally altered relationship between military service and social status, while creating national armed forces defending Japan against foreign threats, without relying on traditional warrior classes whose loyalty to new regime remained questionable. The requirement that all male citizens serve 3 years active duty followed by 4 years in reserves eliminated samurai monopoly on military service, while creating opportunities for social advancement through military careers open to individuals, regardless of family background or hereditary status. The legacy of Japanese feudalism lived on, not in institutional forms, which had been systematically eliminated, but in cultural values, aesthetic traditions, and social relationships, continuing influencing Japanese civilization long after formal abolition of warrior rule and establishment of modern governmental systems based on constitutional monarchy and bureaucratic administration. From Heian courtiers debating kimono layers to Kamakura warriors building first shogunate, from Ashikaga cultural flowering to Sengoku chaos, from Nobunaga's revolutionary violence to Tokugawa's 250-year peace, from Perry's black ships to Meiji modernization, Japan's feudal journey demonstrates how societies transform while preserving essential cultural identity. The samurai spirit, discipline, loyalty, honor, aesthetic refinement survived institutional death to become modern Japan's cultural foundation. Subscribe to Colossus of Empires for more epic journeys through history's greatest civilizations and transformations.